While my daughter was posting photos from a party in her new $5 million mansion, I was eating cold canned beans, wearing 2 winter jackets because the heating in my old house had been shut off weeks ago. I truly believed we were a family, waiting for the day they would come and pick me up as they promised. Then I saw her post. Finally, we are surrounded by people of our level. It feels so good to get rid of the old junk that was pulling us down. As I stared at the screen of my neighbor's phone with shaking hands, I realized that the junk she was referring to wasn't the old furniture or the dusty carpets. She was talking about me, her own father. I spent 40 years breaking my back at 2 jobs to make sure she never wanted for anything. I paid for the elite private schools, the Ivy League tuition, and even handed over my life savings to jumpstart her business a decade ago. Now, at 63, with joints that ache every time the temperature drops, I found myself discarded like a broken chair that didn't fit the aesthetic of her new life. They told me the move was temporary, that they just needed to set things up before bringing me to the new estate. It was all a calculated lie to keep me quiet, while they transitioned into a world where a tired, blue-collar father was an embarrassment. The silence in the house was deafening. The air was so cold, I could see my breath in the living room where we once shared Christmas dinners. My phone had been silent for days. Every time I tried to call, it went straight to voicemail. I told myself they were just busy with the move, that the mansion was huge and they were overwhelmed. But looking at those Instagram photos, I saw the truth. They weren't busy. They were celebrating. There were catering crews, a live band, and rows of luxury cars in a driveway I wasn't allowed to see. My daughter looked radiant in a dress that probably cost more than my yearly pension. She looked happy. She looked relieved to finally be free of the man who gave her everything. I sat there in the dark, the glow of the neighbor's phone, the only light in my life, and felt a coldness sharper than the winter air settling into my bones. It wasn't just sadness. It was the first spark of a very calculated, very justified fire. To understand how I ended up freezing in a dark house while my daughter sipped champagne, you have to understand what I gave up for her. 10 years ago, Sarah came to me with a vision. She wanted to start an upscale lifestyle brand. She had the degree I paid for, but she didn't have a dime of her own. I didn't hesitate. I went to the bank and took out a massive loan against this very house, the home my wife and I had spent decades paying off. I handed her $200,000 and told her I believed in her. I even signed on as a silent partner and guarantor, putting my name on the legal paperwork just to make sure she got the best interest rates. For a decade, I was her shadow. When her warehouse flooded, I was there at 3 a.m. with a mop. When her delivery driver quit, I drove the truck for 16 hours straight. I never asked for a paycheck. I told her to reinvest it, to build her dream. I stayed in my old work boots and flannel shirts, happy to see her name in local business magazines. She used to call me her hero and her rock. But as the money started rolling in, the calls got shorter. The thank yous turned into "not now, Dad, I'm busy." I thought it was just the stress of success. I didn't realize she was already ashamed of the man who smelled like grease and hard work. She began suggesting that I should rest more and stay out of the office. She said my presence was confusing the brand identity. I laughed it off, thinking she was just joking about my old-fashioned ways. But she was serious. She started filtering me out of her life long before the move. She invited me to dinners only when no clients were around. She'd gift me expensive sweaters and then get annoyed when I didn't look like a man of leisure. I was a tool she used to build her throne, and once the throne was finished, she realized the tool was an eyesore. I gave her the world, and she used it to build a wall high enough to keep me out. It was my neighbor, Mr. Henderson, who finally pulled the veil from my eyes. He's a good man, a retired postman who always kept an eye on my place. He knocked on my door one evening holding his smartphone like it was a piece of evidence. He looked at my shivering frame, my breath misting in the freezing hallway, and he sighed with a look of pure pity. "Arthur, I wasn't going to show you this," he whispered, "but I can't watch you wait for a phone call that isn't coming. He tapped the screen and handed it to me. There it was. A high-definition video of a housewarming party that looked like a scene from a movie. The caption read, "New beginnings in our forever home. No more anchors holding us back." I scrolled through the photos, my fingers numb. The mansion was a white marble fortress with floor-to-ceiling windows and a pool that glowed neon blue in the twilight. It was located in the most exclusive gated community in the state, a place where you need an invitation just to drive past the front gate. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow to the chest. While I was counting my remaining pennies to buy bread and keeping the lights off to save on electricity, they were throwing a party that probably cost more than my entire year's pension. They hadn't just moved, they had vanished into a different world. In every photo, Sarah was smiling, her husband was laughing, and they were surrounded by people in designer suits. What hurt the most was seeing the interior of the house. In the background of one photo, I saw a familiar wooden box. It was the jewelry box I had carved for Sarah when she was 12. It was sitting on a marble counter, but everything else, my old photos, my favorite recliner, the mementos of our family history, was nowhere to be seen. They had taken the pretty things and left the man who provided them in the ruins of the past. I handed the phone back to Mr. Henderson, my heart feeling like a heavy stone. I wasn't just forgotten. I was intentionally erased. As I continued to scroll through the photos on Mr. Henderson's phone, I stopped at a picture that made my blood run cold. It was a photo of my grandson, Leo. I had raised that boy since he was an infant, teaching him how to fish and how to fix a leaky faucet. On the screen, he was laughing, holding a massive gift box. But it wasn't me standing next to him. Standing in my place was a tall man in a tailored charcoal suit, his hair perfectly coiffed. He had his arm around my daughter Sarah, and his hand was resting on Leo's shoulder. The caption underneath read, "Leo loves his new grandpa Julian." It's amazing what happens when you surround your children with role models who actually represent success and sophistication. My vision blurred. This Julian was likely some wealthy investor or a friend of my son-in-law. They had literally replaced me. They found someone who looked the part, someone who matched their new marble floors and expensive paintings. To them, my calloused hands and my stories about the old days were low class. They didn't want their friends to know that their wealth was built on the back of a man who worked in a factory and lived in a drafty house. I looked at my own reflection in the darkened window of my cold kitchen. I looked like a ghost. I had spent so much time worrying about them that I had neglected myself. I realized then that Sarah didn't just want me out of the house. She wanted me dead to the world. She wanted to pretend she was born into royalty, and a living father in an old work jacket was a clutter in her perfect narrative. The pain was unbearable, but beneath the pain, a cold, hard logic began to take shape. They thought I was a senile old man who wouldn't fight back. They thought I was just a character they could write out of their script. They were very, very wrong. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I put on my only decent suit, the one I wore to my wife's funeral, and took the bus to the outskirts of the city where the elite lived. I needed to see it for myself. I walked for nearly an hour from the bus stop until I reached the tall, wrought iron gates of the community. I stood across the street, hiding behind a large oak tree like a criminal in my own life. Through the gaps in the hedge I saw them. The mansion was even more insulting in person. It was a monument to the money I had helped them make. I saw Sarah come out onto the balcony with a cup of coffee. She looked so peaceful, so satisfied. A few minutes later, a silver SUV pulled into their driveway. Two men in uniforms hopped out and began unloading large boxes. They weren't groceries. They were high-end decor. Then I saw something that broke the last string of my heart. One of the workmen carried a heavy black trash bag to the curb. As he tossed it down, the bag ripped. My old fishing tackle box spilled out onto the pavement, the one my father had given me. Next to it was a framed photo of me and Leo at the lake. The glass was shattered. They weren't just leaving my things behind, they were throwing my memories away as if they were literal garbage. I watched as my son-in-law, Mark, walked out, saw the mess, and kicked my tackle box further into the gutter so it wouldn't block the driveway. He didn't even look at the photo of me. He just checked his gold watch and hurried back inside. They were living in a palace built on my sacrifices, and they were treating my life like a stain they couldn't wait to scrub away. I didn't yell. I didn't run to the gate. I simply took out a small notebook, wrote down the address, and walked back to the bus stop. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I had seen enough. It was time to stop being a victim and start being the businessman I had taught Sarah to be. The next day, I didn't go back to my cold living room. I headed straight to a small, dusty office downtown. Behind the desk sat Frank, a man I'd known for 40 years. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was a shark who had retired to a quiet life, or so I thought. When I told him what happened and showed him the photos on my phone, his face turned from friendly to stone cold. "Arthur," he said, leaning forward, "they didn't just leave you behind. They're trying to erase you legally." Frank spent 3 hours digging through digital records and property filings. What he found made my stomach churn. My daughter had listed our family home, the one I was currently sitting in, for sale on a luxury real estate site. The listing described it as an investment opportunity and ready for demolition. But the real shocker came when we looked at the paperwork for her new mansion. She had bought it under the umbrella of her lifestyle corporation. "She thinks she's clever," Frank whispered, pointing at the screen. 10 years ago, when you gave her that startup capital, you didn't just give her a gift. You signed as a founding partner and a 50% shareholder to secure those loans. Because she never officially bought you out or filed a dissolution of partnership, you still own half of the parent company. And guess what? The parent company owns that mansion. Then Frank's eyes narrowed as he pulled up a document from 3 months ago. It was a deed transfer for my current house. "Arthur, did you sign this?" I looked at the signature. It looked like mine, but the loop on the A was wrong. I had never seen that paper in my life. She had forged my signature to sell the roof over my head while I was still sleeping under it. She wanted me out, and she didn't care if I ended up on the street. Frank looked at me and smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "They think you're a tired old man, Arthur. Let's show them you're the chairman of the board." The realization of the forgery was the final nail in the coffin of my mercy. Frank and I spent the next few days working in silence, fueled by cold coffee and a shared sense of justice. We didn't call the police yet. If we did that now, Sarah would just get a fancy lawyer and drag it out for years while I stayed in the cold. No, I wanted something more absolute. Since I was still a 50% owner of her corporation, I had legal access to all the company accounts. I sat in Frank's office and watched the numbers crawl across the screen. Sarah had been living large on the company's dime, funneling money into consulting fees that actually paid for her designer bags and the marble statues in her garden. She had overextended herself. She was betting everything on a massive grand opening gala for her new brand line, an event that would be held at the mansion. All her new high society friends and potential investors would be there. She needed this night to be perfect to secure more funding. With a few clicks, I exercised my rights as a founding partner. I didn't take her money. I simply froze the corporate accounts for an internal audit due to suspected signature irregularities. Then, I changed the locks on the commercial warehouse where her new inventory was stored. She wouldn't find out until it was too late. I was cutting off the oxygen to her fake life, one valve at a time. I went back to my cold house one last time. I didn't feel the chill anymore. I felt a strange, calm energy. I looked at the for sale sign a realtor had hammered into my front lawn without my permission. I pulled it out of the ground with a satisfying grunt and tossed it into the crawlspace. Sarah thought she had moved on to a better world, leaving her old junk behind. She had no idea that the junk was about to walk through her front door and take back everything it had built. The trap was set, and the bait was her own vanity. The night of the grand gala arrived. I stood across the street from the mansion once again, but this time I wasn't hiding behind a tree. I was sitting in the back of a black sedan Frank had arranged. The house was glowing like a diamond. Valets were parking Ferraris and Porsches along the curb, and women in dresses that cost more than my first car were gliding up the front steps. I could hear the faint sound of a string quartet playing in the garden. It was a scene of pure, unadulterated vanity. Through the massive glass windows I could see Sarah. She was wearing a shimmering gold gown, holding a crystal flute of champagne. She was laughing, her head thrown back, gesturing toward the marble foyer as if she had carved it herself. She was the queen of her own little empire, surrounded by people of her level. I saw Mark, her husband, shaking hands with the mayor and other local bigwigs, playing the part of the successful entrepreneur. They looked untouchable. They looked like they had successfully buried their past. What they didn't know was that while they were clinking glasses, their world was already crumbling. The caterers were getting nervous because their credit cards had been declined an hour ago. The security team at the front gate was about to be replaced. Sarah's new life was a beautiful balloon, and I was holding the needle. Every time she smiled at a guest, she was smiling at a lie. I checked my watch. It was 9 p.m., the peak of the party, the moment when Sarah was scheduled to give her big speech about vision and growth. I adjusted my tie in the rearview mirror. I didn't look like a man who had been eating cold beans in a dark house. I looked like the man who had worked 40 years to build an inheritance that was being squandered by thieves. I stepped out of the car, nodding to Frank and the two uniformed officers waiting in the shadows. "It is time," I said. The music was about to stop, and I was the only one who knew the ending of the song. I walked up the marble steps, my footsteps echoing against the silence that seemed to follow me. As I pushed open the massive double doors, the golden light of the chandelier hit me. Sarah was standing on the grand staircase, a microphone in her hand. "Success isn't just about money," she was saying to the crowd of 100 people. "It is about leaving behind everything that no longer serves your future." She saw me then. The microphone slipped from her hand, hitting the floor with a deafening thud that rang through the hall. "Dad?" she whispered, her face turning a ghostly shade of white. The crowd turned. I didn't stop. I walked right into the center of the ballroom. Mark tried to intercept me, his face twisted in a fake smile. "Arthur, you are early." "Let's talk in the back," he hissed, grabbing my arm. I shook him off with a strength that surprised even me. "I am not here to talk, Mark," I said, my voice projecting clearly to every corner of the room. I pulled out a thick envelope and tossed it onto the glass table next to a tray of caviar. "I am here as the majority shareholder of the corporation that owns this house, and I am here as a victim of identity theft." I looked at the crowd, then back at my daughter, who was trembling on the stairs. "You told these people you built this from nothing. You told your Instagram followers I was old junk. But you forgot that the junk still owns the deed, and the junk didn't sign the papers to sell his home." 2 police officers stepped through the door behind me. The room went dead silent. "Sarah," I said, my heart finally turning to ice, "the corporate accounts are frozen. The inventory is seized. And since this mansion was bought with funds you diverted through a forged signature, it is now being held by my legal trust. You have 30 minutes to pack a suitcase. Your new level friends can watch you leave, or they can leave first." The high society guests began to scramble for the exit, whispering in horror. Sarah fell to her knees, sobbing, the gold sequins of her dress looking like armor that had finally shattered. She tried to reach for my hand, but I stepped back. I wasn't her hero anymore. I was the landlord. I watched as the valets brought around the luxury cars for the fleeing guests, leaving my daughter and her husband standing in a palace that no longer belonged to them. The aesthetic was gone. Only the truth remained. After the lights went out in the mansion and the last of the high society guests had fled, a strange peace settled over me. I didn't stay in that marble fortress. I sold the mansion within a month, using the proceeds to replenish the retirement funds Sarah had nearly drained and to set up a trust fund for my grandson, Leo, one that his parents cannot touch. I moved back into my old house, but it is not the drafty, cold place it used to be. I used a fraction of the money to give it a full restoration. Now the heating works perfectly, the garden is blooming, and the walls are filled with photos of people who actually love me. Sarah and Mark had to move into a tiny two-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. Without my backing and with their reputation in ruins, their luxury brand vanished overnight. Sarah calls me sometimes, crying, talking about family and second chances. I listen, but I do not give in. I send them enough to make sure Leo has what he needs, but not a penny more for their aesthetic. I've spent my 60s learning that respect isn't given, it is earned, and loyalty isn't something you can buy with a gold watch. Today I spend my time teaching Leo how to actually build things in my new workshop. I'm traveling, I'm learning, and for the first time in my life, I'm not anyone's tool. I'm just Arthur. And Arthur is doing just fine. Looking back at the empty mansion that night, I realized that they wanted a life of luxury, but they forgot that a house is just stone and glass. It is the soul inside that matters. I took my soul back. Did I do the right thing by evicting them in front of everyone? Or was I too harsh? What would you have done if your own children treated you like old junk once they got rich? If you enjoyed this story of justice and a father's revenge, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our upcoming stories. Don't forget to hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one of them. The end. Thank you for listening.